night and seemed excited. You came to my room." "I was thinking then," explained Garry, "that maybe you were eloping with Warren." "Then you came home again a little after 1 o'clock. You waked me then and acted peculiarly." "I was reassuring myself," he said, "that you really hadn't left the house." "The next morning while you were taking your shower I was putting up your laundry," Hazel went on. "I found a revolver in your drawer. I didn't think anything of it then. I hadn't even read the papers about the killing. But later I remembered it. I went back to look for the revolver, just why I don't know, and it was gone. I questioned you about it a couple of days later, and you denied that you had ever had a revolver in the house. And I knew then, Garry, I knew that you had done it." He squeezed her hand. "We always did know more about each other than we were told, didn't we, little sis? Because at that moment, too, I knew that you knew." The young man turned back to the detectives. "And what now?" he questioned. "We'll have to hold you, Gresham. You'll have to go through the form of a trial, but you'll get off, don't worry." Sister and brother left the room hand in hand. Alone again, the two detectives faced each other. "You win, David," said Leverage admiringly. "Though darned if I know how you do it." "A combination of luck and common sense," returned Carroll simply. "This time it was principally luck. It usually is in such cases, but most detectives don't admit it. It is the wild-eyed reporter with the vivid imagination whom we can thank for this solution. It was his fiction that brought about Miss Gresham's ridiculous confession and that which caused me to know that she must be shielding her brother. As to how matters stand, I say thank God." "Why?" "Garry Gresham will undoubtedly be freed. It was a clear case of self-defense. Unfortunately, the fact that there was an elopement will have to be known, but that is a comparatively trivial thing, unpleasant as it may be for Miss Gresham. And most of all, I'm glad because Naomi Lawrence's name will not be dragged into it." "How will you work that, David?" "It can be done, Eric. The district attorney is a pretty good friend of mine, and he's a good square fellow. Of course he will have to know the entire story, and it is a certainty that he will believe it. And when he does, you know that he will handle the case so that Mrs. Lawrence will not be connected. Irregular, yes. But you believe he can, and will, do it, don't you?" "You bet your bottom dollar he will. He's another nut like you, so bloomin' human it hurts." "And now," said Carroll, "I want to chat with William Barker. There are one or two loose ends I want to clear up." Barker was very humble as he entered the room. "You're free of the murder charge," stated Carroll promptly. "But we may hold you for blackmail." Barker heaved a sigh of relief. "I ain't objectin' to that, Mr. Carroll. It's a small thing when a man has thought he might be strung up." "Who killed Warren?" questioned the detective. "Don't you know?" came the surprised answer. "Yes, but I'm asking you." "I suppose you're driving at something new," retorted Barker. "But I really think Mrs. Lawrence shot him." "She didn't," answered Carroll. "And there's one thing I want to warn you about right now, Barker. You're the only person except the chief here and myself who knows that Mrs. Lawrence is connected with the case. I want her name kept out of it. Of course that makes it impossible to arrest you for blackmail. And so, if you tell me the entire truth, I'm going to let you go free. But If I ever hear of her name in connection with this case, I'll know that you have leaked. And I'll get you if it takes me 10 years. Understand?" "Yes, sir, I do. Thankin' you, sir. I know which side my bread is buttered on." "Good. Now I'm telling you that Mrs. Lawrence did not shoot Warren. Who did?" "I don't know." Suddenly his expression changed. "If it wasn't her, Mr. Carroll, it must have been Mr. Gresham." "Ah! What makes you think that?" Barker's eyes narrowed. "You give me your word of honor, Mr. Carroll, I ain't going to be pinched for blackmail?" "Yes." "Well, it was this way, sir. Bein' Mr. Warren's valet, I knew he was plannin' to run off with Mrs. Lawrence. I knew that he was going to raise an awful row in town, and I knew that Mr. Gresham would do a heap to keep his sister from bein' unhappy, as she was going to be, if Mr. Warren done as he was plannin'. So I called up Mr. Gresham that night and told him everything but the woman's name. My idea was that he'd bust up the elopement. I went to the station to make sure that Mrs. Lawrence got there, knowin' that once she was there, if young Mr. Gresham busted things up, I'd be able to blackmail Mrs. Lawrence, her bein' a rich woman. I'm comin' clean with you, Mr. Carroll." "Go ahead." "I never seen Mr. Gresham at all at the station. And when I seen Mrs. Lawrence get into the taxi, and found out the next mornin' that Mr. Warren's body was found there, of course I couldn't help thinkin' like I did, could I?" "I suppose not. You're a skunk, Barker, and I hate to let you go. But if the chief is willing, I'm going to do it, because your hide isn't worth Mrs. Lawrence's good name. Now get out." "I'm free?" questioned the man eagerly. "How about it, Leverage?" "Sure," growled Leverage. "You're the boss, David." Immediately, as Barker left the room, Carroll turned to the telephone and called a number. "Who's that?" questioned Leverage. "Mrs. Lawrence," answered Carroll. "I want to tell her that she is safe." Leverage smiled broadly. And as he watched Carroll's eager face, he saw an expression of consternation cross it. Carroll covered the transmitter with his hand. "Good Lord!" he groaned. "It's Evelyn Rogers." Leverage chuckled, then listened shamelessly to Carroll's end of the conversation. Yes, this is David Carroll. I'm glad you think it was sweet of me to telephone. I want to speak to your sister. She isn't there? Well, ask her to telephone me at headquarters as soon as she comes in, will you?" "Uh-huh." "The Warren case has ended. And that's what I wanted to tell her." "I only did my best." "Yes." "Oh. Say!" The receiver clicked on the hook. Carroll was grinning as he turned back to his friend. "Guess what that young thing said when I told her that I had solved the Warren case." "Tell me, David. I'm a poor guesser." "She said," returned Carroll gravely, "that I am just the cutest man she has ever known." End of chapter 22. Recording by Roger Moline. End of Midnight by Octavius Roy Cohen.